Going to continue this afternoon with debate number 4 on the new information technologies and whether they will change medicine or not. And I'm going to ask Mathieu Durand to give us the results of the question that was asked of the young doctors. The question they were asked was to know what their opinion about new technologies was. New younger doctors like using new technologies. That's a well-known fact. And according to the poll, 83% of the doctors queried use one of the IT tools in their daily practice. It's quite a high figure, and the question could be put this way. Are the gaffers going to change the doctor's practice today, or are we going to have to wait for the next generation to come along to generalize their use so that everybody uses digital tools? And we have Caroline Faillet as moderator to answer that question in the next debate. We're going to ask Nicolas Boujou, Eric Cornu, Pascal Sampé, and Isabelle Vitali to come along to sit around the table, and Caroline Faillet will be the moderator. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, you can applaud. Thank you. So, new technologies, are they going to change medicine? The answer is in the question, probably, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. But I think it's well worth asking ourselves that question. Last time I saw his doctor, he was working on pieces of paper, and I think his computer was made of wood. So maybe I should find out whether he's not going to soon disappear from the landscape. Pascal, could you describe the new technologies, some very new with 3D printers that enable us to make prostheses, and others are older, like artificial intelligence. Well, 3D printers are obviously something that are going to open new fields for us. But what's happening is that there's a sort of convergence between the major technological developments and things that have been worked on for years, because artificial intelligence goes back quite a long while now. And there's an expectation in our ecosystem for huge masses of information. And for whatever is really complicated, artificial intelligence is going to make a big difference. It's all that information in which you formalize your knowledge. It's the sum of information that exists and, in fact, that you need every day. But today you don't have access to it all because it's far too much. Not even to mention the social networks. And information systems today really do become necessary. The masses of information are huge. We were saying that connected objects had always existed, even if they weren't connected in the past. Can we say that's a development or a true revolution, Nicola? Although it's 4 industrial revolutions that are coming along at the same time at an unknown speed in the history of mankind. And some people may not think this is a change, that there's no real growth there. But the subject is to understand that today you've got the revolution of nanotechnology and biotechnology, in which there are lots of different things that don't directly concern medicine. There's some extraordinary things, and you've got GMOs and NBCs. This is related to artificial intelligence. But the revolution is going to be multi-use systems that will have an impact not only on one sector of the economy, but on all sectors, like the railway in the 30s, washing machines in the 50s, and so on, to answer the question, as we've already said, all of the industrial revolutions have an exponential profile, which means that they start off from zero, from nothing. They start slowly, they accelerate, and then all of a sudden they start to slow down, which is difficult to understand for those who have linear brains. Linear means there hasn't been a lot of growth over the last few years, and there won't be very much in the future either. But what we're being asked to do is think about these things, and we've got to think about them and work on them to understand that we're in a change here, especially in medicine, but not only medicine, which is exponential. And any exponential change is a destructive construction phenomenon. You're going to live with that for 15 years. You're going to live with changes that are going to bring you a lot, which will kill the old world. So it's neither good nor not good. It's breathtaking and amazing at the same time. We're at the beginning of the acceleration phase. You all know about Moore's law. You know the story of the chess game. People were fed up with playing at other games, and so they invented the chess game. And on the guy who invented that ought to have had his head cut off, actually. But the crucial point is that today we're getting on to the second part of the chessboard, which means that it's impossible to plan what medicine is going to be in 2 years' time. The only thing you can actually forecast is that technology will have no connection with what we have today, because we're in a hyper-revolution, because it's a revolution that's going very fast. Hyper-revolution, hyper-creation, hyper-destruction, and therefore hyper-change. Okay, we're going to decelerate a bit so that our linear brains can rest a little bit. What is at stake in this revolution, apart from increasing the price of drugs against toxoplasmosis by 5,000%? Let's leave aside the things that have increased the price of drugs. There are some concrete breakthroughs that enable us to develop better. That's to say, to develop our drugs in a more targeted way. With technological breakthroughs, we're going to be able to produce faster and therefore more cheaply. And some of these breakthroughs are going to be very important for us because they're core breakthroughs for us. And we're going to, in the long term, have to go from being paid per procedure to be paid on the basis of results, because it's been proven that this is the only way to go. It's going to be difficult to start with, and it's the economic pressure that is doing this, either in the dimension that means that we've got to research and develop our products, but whatever happens, it's going to accelerate the adoption of new technologies for us. We try to describe the changes that are occurring. Now let's take a look at the players and see how this is going to impact them. Are the drug firms becoming Uberized? Are they Uberizing themselves with Google? Are they being Uberized by Google too? I think that the new health technologies that are coming along have started off these changes that we're talking about, and they could either be considered as a threat, or you could say, well, this can also be a great opportunity for us. I prefer the second solution personally, because I think that it is an opportunity. We've been talking about drugs and the importance of therapeutical innovation. But very probably today we can go farther still and propose an offer that will add to the offer we have today with data, diagnosis, medical devices and services based on new health technologies. As industrialists, it's going to require an effort because we're not specialists in these new technologies and we never will be. So once again, this is going to push us forward. And I think there's a lot of interest value in working together with other people, such as people who make software packages, those who do robotics, domotics, which is going to mean that we have to reconsider our ecosystem with the added value that we have. We've got to be able to measure the value of the new offer. We've always got to keep the patient at the center of our concerns at the same time and be at the center of the ecosystem, because today we're going to have to take into account that as well. But you're innovating from inside or with the externalities, with this new way of going into research. What's also very interesting is that we've got to do some very concrete things, some down-to-earth things. At Roche, we are doing some very concrete things. We're going to go and work with the experts that we mentioned, and big groups, medium-sized groups, and also startups with different types of scientific communities that we'll be able to cooperate with to set up a scientific research program that will enable us to understand the epidemiology in France on the basis of the data that are available today. And we'll also have to be able to work with new players and multidisciplinary teams, because health today is not just the health professionals and the pharmaceutical industry, but it's also other people such as legal specialists, data mining specialists, mathematicians. And it seems to me extremely important today to be able to work with all of these different ecosystems. And we're also going to have to change the way we proceed, to change the way we behave. At Novartis, was there a before and afterwards too? Well, I could perhaps tell you about some of the experience that we had when we started working on intelligent developments. We're working with people who have a cycle time of about 10 years, and they say we'll come up with a prototype in 3 months. The prototype's there in 3 months. We'll say, okay, well, it's not bad, but we'll have another one. We'll set up another one because things change very fast. And therefore, you've got this shock. It's a bit scary at the beginning, but it's refreshing. And it's something that is what the reality of the future is going to be. Things are accelerating. Time is accelerating. And how can a player in the area of biology and medicine with longer cycles face this? And this is where I feel a bit more cautious about what the company of the future will be, because I'm not sure it'll be what it is today at all. Because the value that we have in intelligence and data and so on is going to represent either a competition or an ally, or perhaps even a new business for us. And you imagining what it's going to be like is something we can't do. We can detect trends, but we've got to be agile and curious, and it's something that's difficult for us with our culture. But in relation to that, I think there's something that we're going to have to understand. We're talking about innovation a lot. The term is depreciated. We talk about it so much that at some point in time you can't just say anything. But I'd like to rehabilitate a term for the big companies, which is imitation. Innovating when you're a big company is difficult. Why is it difficult? Well, because you've got a big structure which manufactures a lot of bureaucracy, which is quite normal. It develops competencies too, but it's to a certain extent the dependent on things that are difficult to change. So when I hear you say what you're saying, it's incredibly interesting, but I'm not quite sure that there's a problem between Google and Novartis, because Google have a lot of problems today. They've gone wrong several times. Their core business is search engines, and they're actually losing market share. It seems to me that you are going to have to be open 360 degrees. And if you're open 360 degrees, you're going to be capable of locating the good ideas and being sufficiently agile. I agree upon what you said there, to locate all the little ideas that may be around elsewhere. The economists are interested in two countries that are very important economy-wise, which are Singapore and Israel. Singapore has a GDP that's 30% higher than Israel. Israel innovates and Singapore uses the ideas. Well, I'd like to bounce back on that. We're talking about working with new players. And there are startups. In France, we're very fortunate. We've got health startups that are very, very good indeed, and there are lots of them. And because we can do so, I think we've got to locate them, support them, and help them. And even buy them in some cases. Let's come back to France. I wanted to know, on the hospitals, Pascal, can you tell us what's changed in the American hospitals? We're not allowed to say Dr. Watson, but for those of you who know Watson, it's an industrial implementation of artificial intelligence systems which can deal with huge amounts of information, text and so on, so that they can be used to help you in decision making. It means that you don't have to read thousands and thousands of books, and you can get the information instantaneously. It was implemented in a certain number of hospitals in the USA, in the area of cancer, for example. Always based on the same logic, to support the doctor in decision making. You can go on Watson and find a lot of stuff on the web. But it's very interesting because it's very revealing about what we were saying earlier. But what you see here in terms of changes is that you've got a lot of smaller players, and that the ecosystem is changing fast. All the big players are there, and people wonder what they're going to do in medicine, because it's by building the ecosystems that we're going to be able to do something which is for the patient's benefit, creating new businesses and new services. We're in an exponential phase of the thing, and we're beginning to understand that a pharmaceutical company can actually learn a lot from this. What Nicola said is quite right. Innovation is often repetition, And artificial intelligence is something that's everywhere now. Could one imagine that a startup might use the technology that Watson has, and that I could perhaps take a look at the health forms on my mobile phone before I go and see him? And well, artificial intelligence is something that's now becoming mature, and we have solutions that are mature and that we're deploying at for our clients. And the strategy is that we say, well, our ambition is not to be everywhere, but we have technologies that can be useful. And we have a whole series of ecosystems. I think we have about 400 small and medium businesses that are developing their applications with artificial intelligence modules that are built and nourished by them. And I think that makes systems that are very agile. Okay, so you do your business with these applications. I'm a patient, and we've talked a lot this morning about how connected objects could be helpful to the patient to take his medication, to follow his treatment, and in terms of prevention too. What is data going to add to medicine in terms of research, for example? Well, the data, because they give us the capacity to aggregate huge amounts of information, which will enable us to move forward in terms of prognosis and diagnosis of diseases. But in addition to that, they'll help us to improve our patients' follow-up. If we can capture data in the follow-up of chronic diseases, for example, as we were saying this morning, it's going to enable us to improve the way we manage our patients. In certain diseases, we'll be able to improve the dosage of our medicines and control the side effects and monitor the side effects, rather. And then we'll be able to analyze the data, which will come back to the patient as medical advice and prescriptions, and which should help us to improve the way we manage our patients. Prognosis, diagnosis before the disease is managed, and management of the patients once they're under treatment. And in the future, when I call 15, what is it going to be? An automatic system that says if you've got a temperature, push 1. It's Cass that's going to call you, because there are two dimensions. First of all, the data will be connected up. This morning, whilst I was coming here, there's a very nice photographic show, and it was very interesting to see it. But just imagine if you could see a video. You're developing today a new treatment for cardiac patients, for example. You know very well that in the patient follow-up, you've got indicators which, if you can capture them at the right moment, they'll tell you that you're going to have to do something, otherwise the patient will have to be sent to hospital. And this is no longer just a sort of anticipation. It's something that's become real. Well, that sounds fascinating, and I think it's very important to explain this to the French people, because the problem that I have is that I can't reconnect public opinion with the concept of progress. People think it's all vaguely interesting, but rather remote from their real concerns, which is their child who hasn't got a job, the tax bill that's too high, and so on. And they're things that are far more down to earth. And I think that health is that. It's a wonderful way of giving more content to the concept of progress. It's a way of saying to people, this is going to give you business activity and destruction. But what is there at the end of the wave of innovation? It's something that means that you'll be able to care for yourself better, and you'll be able to cure cancer or make it into a chronic disease. And that's when the hotline will call you. It's your role to explain that, but you mustn't be corporatist about it. When I do interventions in this sector, sometimes I talk to audiences that are made up of people from the health sector. They're very often patients' association. They can see the benefit right away. The ones I don't have with me are the doctors, in most cases, because they say, oh, this is all very complicated, and I do understand that. But you need both. What are the doctors afraid of? Well, it's like the taxis and Uber. You're necessarily going to be a bit of afraid of the future. But let's come back to what I was saying earlier. Peter said that what is new is not old. He makes mistakes sometimes. I never do. Modesty is something I leave to other people, obviously. Schumpeter said, those who are going to do the medicine of the future are not the doctors of today. That's exactly what he said. Rather like autonomic cars, a Tesla. It's something that is you're going to have to keep in mind. The medicine of the future has to be you. Saint-Gobain, Michelin are still the leaders on a lot of markets. Bolloré made cigarette papers in the past, and now they're making cars. You've got to know how to change. That's what revolutions are all about. And I think that is true in the area of medicine too. That's to say that those who don't like these technologies will disappear. But those who do like them are going to have wonderful tools, because why are you a doctor? Why do you direct a hospital? Why are you a nurse? Well, to care for people. It's not a job you do just by pure chance. It means you've got a project. And these technologies are going to enable you to go farther with the project. You mustn't be afraid. I've heard a lot of debates saying that everybody's afraid because things are becoming dehumanized. But the whole history of innovation shows us exactly the opposite. The more technology you have, the more human beings you need. There's things that are complementary, like coffee and sugar. And in economy, we call it complementary assets. The more technology you have, the more humanity you need. The first technical revolution is the aeronautical revolution. And you've still got pilots. They haven't disappeared, but they do other things. And those who wanted to pilot like Mermoz did were not kept because it was dangerous. But there's still people who want to make other people fly, who are very enthusiastic about aeronautics. And I think this is what's going to happen in medicine too, and it's fascinating. But if you're a doctor or the director of a hospital and you're scared and say it's not good, well, how am I going to be able to explain to other people that innovation and growth is good? Yes, did you want to add to that? Well, I don't know if I really dare. What I wanted to say was that in the discussions that I have with the doctors, I often think that they're afraid because they don't know. When you don't know, you're afraid, and they don't know like everybody else. So that brings us back to that aspect of co-construction when you're talking about new solutions for diabetics or people with heart failure or cancer. Probably we should be constructing the system with the doctors, because that's where the interaction between the doctor and the patient, a physical interaction, takes place, and technology is not going to break off that. And I simply like to say also that what I find is really a shame is the fact that the young doctors don't get an education in that respect. There are some trainings, but very few. It's rare. Whereas the new generation of doctors should be anticipating the use of new technologies and big data. People are training every day. Are the doctors supported to take into account the changes in technology? Well, I think that there's a factor that's going to accelerate things, and that's the patient, because the patient hasn't waited. We're wondering what's going to happen, but the patients are on the expectative. They've got a pathology, they have it all day long, so they're getting information together, and when they go to the doctor, the patients come along with their genetic map and the most recent articles, and the doctor doesn't know what to do because he's not used to that sort of thing. And I think that the doctors have to feel comfortable. In our company, we do that. We're fairly present in the university course, for example, because they need experts as well, and we need doctors who know what the industry is doing. So there's a common interest in that, but it's true that it is difficult. The trend is to have a doctor who's going to become a technician, a specialized expert, or do you think the doctors are going to have a global vision and use decision-making tools? Well, I don't think technologies will replace the doctors, but they will probably give us augmented doctors. In a few clicks, the doctor will be able to have an assistant, something to support him to make recommendations. So yes, the level of expertise of the doctors is going to increase artificially. There'll always be experts, of course, and we need experts. The system is nourished by expertise. But it's true, personally, I think that the average is going to go up, but it's going to go up for everybody. Is the average going up in France? Watson is something that can be found in France, I think, well, as far as Watson is concerned, yes, it will be available next year for a certain number of services. But as far as health is concerned, mainly in the English-speaking countries, with the doctors in the universities speak English, the databases in English is not a problem. And there are applications on smartphone for GPs. We have partners developing that, so it's something that's going to happen very soon. Eric, you're a cosmopolitan sort of person. Can you tell us about the cultural differences that there are between France and the US? Because things are happening in France, and we'll probably go into that. But what is going to make things move in France? Well, that's tricky. Let's come back to what we were saying this morning. The discussion was very interesting this morning. It's clear that in the United States, there's a drive underway And it's extraordinary because there are things that are happening, and the doctors are asking for these things, so the patient, and the government is supporting them. And rather than being paid per procedure, the doctor is going to be paid on the basis of their results. This is something that's culturally based on an economic evolution. When you see what's happening in France, things are very different. If you take, for example, some of the technologies, you've got co-creation with the pharmacist, the hospital, and the regulator, and the companies. And the regulators are seeking to understand and creating these areas of research. In contrast to that, a lot of people feel a little more reserved. Is it the precautionary principle or something else? But even the regulators are not prepared to have a dialogue on how they should create a framework to allow this experimentation. Startups are all very well, but at some point they're going to have to become industrial. There are startups in the US that, with the FDA, are creating experimental spaces and have access to markets of more 3 million consumers. And they end up with a real product. In Europe, you've got a market of 50 to 60 million with a lot of regulations which are not pan-European. Each time you cross a border, you've got to comply with new regulations. And the health systems carry a certain number of values that we're very attached to. But I think that we've got to stop being afraid and start experimenting, because there won't be a lot of choice on how you apply those technologies in the future. We'll have to have them. It seems to me that being afraid is perhaps French, but it's also European. And the big differences can be seen between the United States and Asia and Europe, and some countries such as France in particular. I'd say that France was the country of progress in the 19th century, with the big engineering schools and so on. In the 19th century, we were really in the forefront, but we've also now become the country of the precautionary principle. So we've gone from one extreme to the other, for reasons which you can understand. The 20th century were complicated with the world wars and so on, and we've understood in the 20th century that radioactivity could perhaps cure disease, but you also made bombs with it. It all depends on the use you make of it, and it's true in the area of health as well. When you talk about the genome, for example, you can use it in wonderful ways to eradicate genetic disease, or it can be used for other things that are of great concern, such as increasing the intellectual capacity of people and so on. So you've got to think about ethics. There's an ethics committee in France which does some very interesting work. But I think this reflection has to be European, because these values are European in reality. So we've got to do a lot of work on ethics in Europe so that we can say to people that we're going to go very, very quickly on artificial intelligence, on genomics, on molecular biology and so on. But you've got to reassure people, and that's pretty normal, especially in Europe. You've got to have ethical measures and think about them in a structured way. And this might even make Europe into the continent of health in the 21st century. That's to say, the country in which we have a social contract, which is going to be relatively fair to all if we do the reform of social security and so on. That will enable us to maintain our social contract. And then we've got to have ethical standards. For example, the genome of a future baby. Is that done to eradicate cystic fibrosis, or is it to choose the color of the baby's eyes? You were talking about startups. Well, that's a good transition because I totally agree with what Nicola has just said, but I'd like to add something extra. We've also got to take action. At some point in time, we've got to at last dare to take action because we're discussing patients and so on, but afterwards, well, what do we do? And I think that the startups are going to query us on that. Are there already some economic players in France? Yes, there are. There are some real experts. To talk about what I know about, we've started thinking about these issues with Volantis. It's a company that is specialized in software. And they really have a lot of expertise. They're not just gadgets. They're companies who develop real medical systems with specific values for our ecosystem. And they're going to have to start soon because otherwise in 2 or 3 years' time the Americans will already have done it. It means that we're going to have to get together different players, the regulators, the industry, specialized companies, people who are specialized in new technologies, but the patients' associations as well, the doctors, the nurses, who really do play an important role, and start building and not just talking. Just one last point, Caroline. It means that there'll have to be several of us working on these issues, and we must make sure that we are allowed to make mistakes because we can learn from errors. Okay, so I got it wrong this time, but I'll start it all over again, and this time I'll get it right. Okay, so the patients are ready, empowerment, the startups are there, the players in the healthcare sector, well, you seem a little bit lukewarm there, and the politicians, you all agree that they're not ready. Well, in France, we think the other way round. We think that things should come from the top, from the politicians. In the 19th century, there was Karl Marx, who explained the concept of history with his theories. And the very last people in France to adapt are the politicians. Things start off from the hospitals. We're super smart and we say, of course, we know how to do that. We know how to get around the problem. I'm not saying that we know how to cheat. It's just that we get through the holes in the regulations, the loopholes in the regulations. And everybody thinks that's fine. But it's when you change public opinion that the politicians are going to change. So you mustn't reverse the problem. Okay, so Nicola, it's the key to change for you. Isabel, what do we need to do to change things in France? Well, I think that we need to go on and take action. We need concrete initiatives with the different players you've mentioned. And we probably need solutions that will interest the patient and in the relationship that the patient has with the health professional. And I'm really dreaming of really working with all the other actors in the ecosystem rather than the industrialists being against the regulator and so on. We've got to be able to work together to really change things. Pascal, what is What do you think we need to change? Well, I listened to the debates this morning and classified good data, good applications, good startups, and good business models. And I think we've got to stop doing that because there's a lot of information that's becoming available and that can be used intelligently for the good of the patient. We've got to leave room for innovation. All these people produce information, and it's by permitting that we'll find new models and new ways of managing the patient. And then you'll be truly bringing a service to the patients if you know how to use the information. The patients will agree because it will be a benefit on them in their everyday lives. And obviously, the government will follow suit. So I think you've got to try and think openly. We have open data, it's very fashionable, but I think we need to do it, not just talk about it. Open innovation as well, yes. It's a bit simplistic, but the ecosystem is a reality and we've got to be able to capitalize on it and change things quickly. I love the idea of you've got to accept that you might fail because that means that people will be prepared to take risks and then things will get off the ground all on their own. Eric. Well, I think there are two very concrete dimensions. We need a round table launched by the ministry and the industry and the startups, the technology, and define the area that we need to explore in France. And then above all, we have to work together because if we don't, then we're going to steal from the patient the hope of a life in better health and sometimes even their survival. We've got to make a good life a reality for all the patients. Well, thank you very much indeed. We have 4 minutes left. I'm not going to conclude after these wonderful words. Do you think that things are going too fast and maybe we don't have the time to go into the ethics and adapt the regulations? Well, things have to go fast because that is what new technology is all about. And that's why we've got to understand that we have to have the capacity to make mistakes, but we've got to create the right regulations so that we can experiment. The citizens and the patients have to trust you. They have to feel that there's someone there for governance. But it's not a governance that is harmful. It will be a governance that can be reassessed in 3 months' time because what happens in 3 months will be very different. Technology is not the future, it's now. So, of course, we've got to go quickly, we've got to do things. It sounds as we sort of have the impression we're talking about science fiction, but we're not talking about the future, we're talking about the beginning of something which is radically different. It's all quite possible within the scope of the precautionary principle. The problem in France is its interpretation. In reality, the margin of interpretation is broader than one might think, which is why I don't think it's not that I think that we should abandon the principle of precaution, but I think we need to find something else. It has to be interpreted as a principle of prudence, of caution. Aristotle explains that very well indeed. Prudence concerns the means that you implement to do something. It's one of the cardinal virtues for Plato too. Prudence is the key word, and we've got to think about the way that we can move forward in the health sector in the coming years in that way. I'd like to conclude by saying that prudence is not something that should block us. There are people who go and do things elsewhere, and the patients will turn to them. In practice, we've created decision-making aids that are used in Bangkok or Peru. Some people will be those who know, and the world is becoming open now. So I think France really does have capacities, but if they're not converted into value, somebody else will do so. So we need the right framework to innovate whilst keeping the principle of prudence and asking ourselves the right questions and simplify things. We have to be prudent, and we've simplified, gone from 100 laws and regulations from 80, but we still now have 120 because we've got 40 new ones that have come along. New laws and regulations have come along, but they're already out of date. Well, thank you all very much.